Usually when we talk about the ingredients sitting on our pantry shelves, there is this expectation of permanence.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you look at a jar of sesame seeds and it just feels like a manufactured object. It is uniform, it is always there, and it seems completely disconnected from anything wild or living.
Right. It is just a thing you buy.
Exactly. You just sprinkle it on a bagel or a stir fry and you do not give it a second thought.
We interact with the final, polished result, completely divorced from the biological struggle that produced it. It's easy to view food as a static commodity when it arrives in a neat little glass jar.
But then you step into the world of actual hands-on cultivation, and suddenly that neat little jar is just shattered. We are looking at a living organism that has gone through an incredible, fragile journey to get to your kitchen.
It really is a journey.
And to understand how wild that journey actually is, our mission today is to explore a single, highly intimate document. We are diving into a personal gardening log.
Yes, the source we are examining today is titled The Pale Bloom of the Leggy Sesame Plant. Notes on Gardening, Part 876. It was published today, April 25, 2026, by an author simply named Ang.
That title alone, Part 876, that is staggering.
It is a lot of entries.
Right. It implies years of meticulous, patient observation. Ang is not just throwing seeds in the dirt. They are chronicling the minute details of how things grow. And today, we are going to act as your guides through Ang's specific observations of the Sesamum indicum.
The sesame plant.
Yeah, it's the sesame plant. Okay, let's unpack this, because Ang's notes completely changed how I look at something I have had in my pantry my entire life.
I think a lot of people feel the same way. While we consume sesame seeds constantly, examining this author's daily notes on the plant's delicate growth process reveals a much broader story of biology, adaptation, and survival.
It is wild. The author has been exploring various edible seeds for cultivation, right? They're experimenting, trying to see what works in their specific setup. And out of all these seeds, only the sesame sprouted with a high germination rate.
It was the survivor right out at the gate.
Exactly.
And, a high germination rate is a crucial starting point. Biologically, it means the seeds were highly viable and the endosperm, which is the starchy food supply inside the seed, was fully intact.
So it had plenty of energy to start.
Right. The plant aggressively pushed out of the soil. But as Ang documents, what happens after that initial burst of success is where the visual expectations diverge drastically from reality.
Yeah, so one of the pots finally blooms, and my immediate thought reading this was, great, the plant is thriving, let's see the spectacular flower.
You expect the red carpet.
I really did.
Right.
You expect a vibrant, bold plant to match this incredibly robust, flavorful seed it eventually produces. But Ang notes that the coloration is actually quite pale.
Yes, the author describes it in very specific detail. The bloom is white, or a pale pink, featuring a light purple tint specifically in the throat.
The throat.
Yeah, which is the inner tubular part of the flower.
Oh, okay. It sounds so unglamorous. It is like seeing a highly polished celebrity's completely unglamorous morning routine.
That is a great way to put it.
Instead of a bold spice-producing plant, you get this quiet, faded-looking little bloom. And Ang realizes something quite profound about their own gardening habits while looking at this shape.
The bell shape.
Right. The flower is tubular. It is bell-shaped. And the author suddenly recognizes a subconscious pattern. They keep intentionally planting flowers with these tubular, bell-shaped blooms.
It's interesting because the gardening log acts as a mirror for the author's own aesthetic preferences here. Ang is drawn to a specific architecture.
Which is very different from, say, a daisy.
Exactly. A tubular, bell-shaped flower is structurally quite different from a wide, flat flower. It creates a secluded environment for pollinators. It forces a bee to actually crawl inside that pale purple throat to reach the nectar, which, ensures the plant gets pollinated in the process.
I want to push back on something else Ang observes, though, because this is the part that really caught me off guard.
Oh, what was that?
The texture. Ang points out a very distinctive feature, which is the hairy texture of the petals.
Ah, yes, the trichomes.
Right. Fine downy hairs are clearly visible on the flower petals, on the buds, and on the green sepals at the base of the flower. When I think of a delicate pale flower, I think of smooth, silk-like surfaces.
Naturally.
The idea of a fuzzy or hairy flower petal is almost jarring.
What's fascinating here is how this detail forces us to zoom in and look at the flower as a physical object interacting with its environment.
Yeah.
Visually, those downy hairs break up the light. They give the plant a frosted, almost matte appearance rather than a glossy one. It softens the already pale pink and white colors, making them look even more muted.
But why would a plant's petals have a hairy texture? Like, is it just an aesthetic quirk of the Sesamum indicum, or is there a mechanical reason for a flower to be fuzzy?
Oh, it is entirely mechanical, and it comes down to a concept in physics and biology called the boundary layer.
Maybe the boundary layer.
Right. Plants develop these tiny hairs, which botanists call trichomes, for intense environmental reasons. In the case of a plant like sesame, which historically evolved in dry, arid climates, those hairs are a survival mechanism.
How so?
They create a microscopic layer of stagnant air right against the surface of the plant.
Oh, wow. So it acts like a windbreaker for the flower.
That is the perfect way to look at it. If you wear a windbreaker, the fabric stops the cold breeze from blowing away the thin layer of body heat radiating off your skin.
Right.
For the sesame flower, those downy hairs stop the breeze from stripping away the plant's moisture. The wind hits the hairs and glides over the top.
Leaving the air underneath completely still.
Exactly. It leaves a tiny, undisturbed pocket of humid air trapped against the delicate petals and buds.
It prevents the plant from drying out. That is incredibly clever. But it also makes the plant feel, I don't know, so much more vulnerable. It is not this slick, armored thing. It is fuzzy, pale, small, and apparently fighting to hold on to its moisture.
It is definitely a fight.
And that vulnerability ties directly into the next major observation Ang makes. Because the physical appearance of this delicate flower is fascinating, but the structure supporting it tells an even more intense story of environmental struggle.
Yes, the stem.
Right. This pale bloom is sitting on top of a highly stressed stem.
Ang introduces the concept of the microclimate here. The author explicitly notes that because of this specific microclimate and limited exposure to full sunlight where the pots are located, the overall plant has become quite leggy.
Leggy, I love that term, but let's break down what that actually means in practice, because Ang points out that the plant cannot seem to maintain sturdy upward growth. It has fragile, elongated stems.
Yes, it is struggling to support itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. I want to try and visualize this legginess. Imagine you are at a crowded general admission concert.
Okay, I am picturing.
You are packed in, and you are standing behind someone who is slightly taller than you. The stage is up ahead, the lights are flashing, but your view is completely blocked by the crowd.
The worst feeling.
Exactly. So what do? You stand on your absolute tiptoes, you stretch your neck, you extend your calves to the absolute limit.
Right, you reach as high as you can.
Technically, you get taller. You can finally see the light of the stage, but your base is entirely unstable. If someone bumps into you, you are going down.
Because you are off balance.
You have sacrificed your stable footing just to get a glimpse of the light. That is exactly what the sesame plant is doing.
That analogy perfectly captures the biological trade-off Ang is observing. The author notes that the sesame literally sacrifices stem thickness for height, entirely dependent on its light exposure.
It's a survival tactic.
It is. Plants have a finite amount of cellular energy. When they are in full, healthy sunlight, they invest that energy laterally. They build thick, robust, sturdy cell walls in their stems to support future weight and withstand the wind.
But when they are starved of light, panic sets in. I mean, the biological imperative is photosynthesis. Without light, they die.
Exactly. So the plant makes an executive decision to divert all its cellular building materials into rapid vertical extension.
It just shoots straight up.
It stretches those stems out, making them elongated and fragile, hoping that just a few inches higher, it will break through the canopy and find the sun.
Wait, but a plant does not have eyes. How does a sesame seed in a pot on a shaded patio actually know it is in the shadow of something else versus just experiencing, like, a cloudy day?
That is a great question.
How does it know to start standing on its tiptoes?
It comes down to chemical light receptors called photochromes.
Phytochromes, okay.
Sunlight contains a full spectrum of colors, including red light and far red light. When sunlight hits a normal, healthy plant canopy, the leaves at the top absorb almost all of the red light for photosynthesis.
Right, they soak it up.
But they let the far red light pass right through them.
So the light that makes it down to the shaded plants is physically different. It has been filtered.
Exactly. The light hitting our leggy sesame plant is depleted of red light and heavily saturated with far red light.
Wow.
The phytochromes inside the sesame stem sense this specific ratio change. It is an evolutionary alarm bell.
Because it means they are trapped.
Right. The plant registers, I am sitting in the shade of another object. I am going to be starved out. That chemical signal triggers a massive rush of growth hormones, causing the cells in the stem to elongate rapidly.
The plant is basically sensing the shadow of its competitors and making a desperate escape attempt. It is saying, I do not care if I am fragile. I do not care if a strong breeze snaps me in half. I must reach the sun.
It is a profound resource allocation. It is sacrificing its core strength to chase essential light. And Ang turns this observation into a direct practical lesson.
Yes, for the home gardener.
The author explicitly points out that if your seedlings lack sturdiness and have fragile, elongated stems, it is a definitive sign they are not getting enough sun.
It is a diagnosis. It totally changes how you look at a windowsill full of little potted plants. You see them leaning and stretching, and it is not a triumphant march upward. It is the physical manifestation of starvation.
That is so true. We often look at a tall plant and assume it is thriving. But Ang teaches us to read the architecture of the plant. Height without thickness is a structural crisis.
The plant is compromising its future stability for immediate survival.
Exactly.
And despite this massive compromise, despite the fragile, leggy stem and the suboptimal microclimate, the plant still managed to produce that pale, hairy, bell-shaped bloom.
Against all odds.
It fought its way to the flowering stage. But as Ang notes, that flower is not the end of the story. In fact, it is incredibly temporary.
The flower, as beautiful and texturally interesting as it is with those moisture-trapping downy hairs and purple throat, well, it serves a highly specific, short-lived purpose. It exists solely to facilitate reproduction.
Ang writes that we will not have to wait long for these flowers to fade. And this is the part that connects this entire gardening log right back to the jars sitting in our kitchens.
Right, the seeds.
Once those delicate petals fade and fall away, the plant starts developing capsules. And it is inside these very capsules that the sesame seeds we consume are actually formed.
We are witnessing the transition from the aesthetic to the utilitarian.
Yes.
The fragile beauty of the flower is discarded the moment its job is done, making way for the dense, nutrient-packed seed pod.
So what does this all mean? For me, there's this wild, almost unbelievable disconnect between the two phases of this plant.
How so?
Well, on one hand, you have this incredibly delicate, light-starved flower. It is pale, it is fuzzy, it is sitting on a wobbly, fragile stem. It is the definition of precarious.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have the sesame seed itself. The seed is hardy, it is crunchy, it is roasted at high heat, baked into breads, completely tough and resilient. How do we reconcile the extreme fragility of the living process with the absolute toughness of the final product?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires a complete shift in our perspective of what food actually is.
Yeah.
It forces us to acknowledge the sheer amount of time, energy, and precarious biological mechanics required to produce even a pinch of spice. You mentioned the author's title earlier, Part 876.
That number is staggering. It implies a daily, perhaps multi-year commitment to observation.
Cultivation requires immense patience. Ang watched this Sesamum indicum from the moment it aggressively sprouted. They watched it struggle in a suboptimal microclimate, observed its phytochromes trigger a desperate push for height over girth.
The legginess.
Right, and documented the subtle textures and boundary layers of its pale bloom.
And all of that. The hairy green sepals, the tubular bell shape, the leggy stems, all of it is just the preamble. The plant is just setting the stage to build a tiny protective capsule.
Botanical history actually gives us a great clue about those capsules. The phrase open sesame from the story of Alibaba isn't just a random magic word.
Wait, really?
No, it refers to a botanical process called dehiscence.
Dehiscence.
Yes. When a sesame capsule reaches full maturity, it dries out and suddenly bursts open, shattering to scatter its seeds.
Oh.
The plant packs all the dense nutrients, the oils, and the hardy structure into the seed, then literally bursts open to release them. The plant sacrifices everything, its stem strength, its delicate petals, and eventually its own protective pods, just to ensure the survival of that hardened seed.
That is incredible. So when we blindly sprinkle sesame seeds on our food, we are consuming the final victory of a very arduous journey.
Exactly.
We are eating the culmination of that plant's desperate reach for the sun. It is honestly kind of humbling. You think you are just garnishing your dinner, but you are actually interacting with the final chapter of an epic survival story.
It recontextualizes our relationship with agriculture entirely. It stops being an industrial commodity and becomes a biological triumph. We realize that every seed is a survivor of its own specific microclimate.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's take a moment to look at the complete journey we have traced today. We stepped into the highly observant world of Ang's gardening notes, diving into part 876 of their log.
Right.
We followed the Sesamum indicum right from its initial, highly viable germination.
We examined its unexpected aesthetic. Those pale, pink and white, tubular, bell-shaped blooms with the light purple throats and the subconscious patterns they revealed about the gardener.
We zoomed in on the startling, hairy texture of the petals, buds, and green sepals, uncovering how those tiny trichomes create a microscopic boundary layer to trap moisture and act like a windbreaker for the delicate bloom.
We broke down the plant's structural crisis. We looked at how phytochromes sense the shadows of a microclimate, triggering a leggy, fragile fight for sunlight where the plant sacrifices its core stem thickness just to stand on its tiptoes and survive.
And finally, we tracked its ultimate fading transformation into the sturdy, seed-bearing capsules that eventually burst open and make their way into our pantries. The key takeaway here is the reminder that every single ingredient in your kitchen has an origin story.
Absolutely.
The things we take for granted are shaped by unseen microclimates, by subtle environmental stressors, and by a fierce biological struggle for resources.
The neatness of the supermarket completely hides the chaotic, hairy, fragile reality of nature. Every uniform jar on a shelf is hiding a complex history of cellular panic, resource allocation, and survival.
Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Something for you to mull over the next time you open your pantry doors to grab a spice or a grain. We just spent this time talking about a single, tiny sesame plant sitting in a pot on a patio.
Just one plant.
Yeah, and we saw how it radically altered its own physical architecture, literally sacrificing its core strength and its structural integrity just to reach the light it needed to survive in its specific microclimate. If this one simple plant is making those kinds of desperate, invisible compromises right in front of us,
It makes you wonder.
what kind of unseen struggles, structural sacrifices, and silent compromises are happening right now in the millions of other agricultural plants we rely on to feed the world every single day? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking closer at the everyday things around you, and we will catch you next time.